morning, Professor Marco Armiero. Good morning to everyone. We are only give some minutes waiting for the connection with all participants, but of course I must say how glad I am, and of course the organization of the fourth meeting of Reporter that this year is held by the University of Coimbra, a space that Professor Marco Armiero knows very well because he was in the University of Coimbra for 5 years. So it's a pleasure to receive you. Just few words in Portuguese. Bom dia. Professor Marco Armiero knows very well Portuguese, so bom dia. Bom dia a todos. Professor Margarida Sobral Neto, the organizer, the present organizer committee, is wrote that she gives you a special welcome, Marco, and of course it's a pity we can be together face to face, but maybe in a short time we can be again. Okay, it's my role to present you. It's of course everyone knows you, but it's important to make maybe this short introduction. Marco Armiero is Italian, so it's important how the connections, international connections, and how sometimes it's difficult to talk in international forums, but it's very important to understand, and special to the youngest, how interesting is the environmental history without frontiers. This is the first message. He's an environmental history, but with a PhD in economic history. Currently, he's working, and he is the director of the KTH Environmental Humanities Laboratory in Stockholm, and he's also director of researcher at the Institute for Studies on the Mediterranean, National Research Council in Italy. Marco has been a postdoctoral fellow and visiting scholar at Yale University, Berkeley, Stanford, the Autonomous University in Barcelona, and the Center for Social Science at the University of Coimbra, as we said before. He has been selected as the Barron Visiting Professor of Environmental Humanities by Princeton University. As he has worked on several topics, for instance, on the nationalization of nature, mass migration and environment, fascism and nature, environmental justice and environmental conflicts, uses of natural resources, politicization of nature and landscape, and so on and so on. With his research, Marco has contributed to writing environmental humanities and political ecology. Since 2019, he is the elected president of the European Society for Environmental History. In 2021, Cambridge University Press has published his new volume, Waste Ocean: Stories from the Global Dump, translated into Italian in the same year. Reading Marco Armiero curriculum, and in particular the abstract of this next conference, we are convinced of the originality of his research approach. How this topic, toxicity and human health, sheds light on a national reality as well as a broader situation. How to approach problems that are more important in one nation than in another. What conditions or factors are common to all nations and which are distinctive? I believe that he has the answers for these and your questions regarding this large original path. And I want to announce that you must put questions if you want in Portuguese, because Marco is able to understand Portuguese during the conference. And at the end, I will read the questions and Marco will answer. So please, Marco, thank you so much. You have your words.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. First of all, I am start sharing my screen and I hope that you can see it now. But before I start, let me first of all to thank Professor Margarida Sobral Neto and the entire committee of this conference and the Reporter Network for this kind invitation. And especially I want to thank Inês Amorim for the fantastic presentation. Something I have learned in my work as a academic, as a researcher, is that I should never accept invitation from friends. Because when a friend will introduce you, the introduction will be so good, so nice, so kind, so generous, that whatever I am going to say now to you, you will be disappointed because you will say, well, but you know, Inês said. So I really need to write this down. Never accept invitation from friends because, you know, friends can be too generous. And Inês today was really, really generous with me. Thank you, Inês. I must also say that it is for me really a great pleasure to be with my colleagues and friends from Portugal. As the ESCH, as the European Society for Environmental History president, I deeply admire your excellent work. And I truly believe that the Reporter is an example for the entire society. I am very sure about this. Yes, so maybe I should also say you something. This is like an advertisement, you know. Please join the European Society for Environmental History. I really think that Southern Europe, you know, Mediterranean Europe should be more present in the society. I really, and you know, as I said, for me, the Portuguese network is so crucial, so important, so well organized, and I must say so friendly and generous, always generous, that I would really like to have a very strong presence from all of you in the society. And by the way, this is the real Marco talking. If you are getting strange emails from some strange Marco Armiero asking for money, well, unfortunately, is a little bit terrible things. This happen with the academic society that, you know, you can get spam, but I am not asking for money. If you want to register to enroll in the society, you can go into the website and you will find all the information. It's not me collecting any money, but I am sure that you know this very well. Anyway, this is my talk for today. Sorry, this is my talk for today. Today I will briefly present some of the arguments I have elaborated in my recently published short volume, Waste-to-Scene, Stories from the Global Dump, published, as Inês said, by Cambridge University Press in the series Elements in Environmental Humanities. And my talk today is going to be about the Waste-to-Scene, the age of waste, its toxic narratives, the epiphanies of the Waste-to-Scene, and the multifold practices that aim to sabotage the Waste-to-Scene. But let's go back to the first slide. So Waste-to-Scene is part of a new, is part of the blooming of new terms and concepts born within and against the global narrative of the Anthropocene. I don't think I need to say too much about the Anthropocene. I am sure that you know this very well, this concept very well. The Anthropocene is the age of humans, when humans have become agents in the transformation of the biogeochemical cycles of the planet. In my volume, I focus on 3 points that I believe are rather problematic in the Anthropocene narrative. So, first of all, the controversial we. Second, the reification of the problem, CO2 emissions. And finally, the limitation of the Anthropocene narrative as a global narrative. Since I believe we are all quite familiar with this critique, I will be very brief in presenting them. If you want, we can go back to these critiques in the Q&A session. The we in the Anthropocene. The we in the Anthropocene is we, the humans. The Anthropocene narrative says that it is that we, the humans, the responsible for the present ecological crisis. Cohorts of social scientists, and humanities scholars have manifested their contrariety to this argument that they believe is flattening social and racial inequalities. Even history itself, if you think about the ecological debt theory, and the idea that somebody has paid a high price to the ecological crisis. For this reason, other names for the new epoch have been proposed, including the Plantationocene and the Capitalocene. The basic message here is to challenge the assumption that an indistinct we, the humans, is the responsible of the ecological crisis. And this is the first critique. The second critique is the reification of the problem. So the reification of the problem refers to the focus in the Anthropocene discourse on the CO2 emissions. Reification of the problem means that we focus on the thing, that CO2 emissions, and look for solutions to the thing, but we do not address the socio-ecological relationships producing the very thing. And finally, this is the third critique. The Anthropocene is a global narrative. It speaks of the Earth system as a whole, but it might seem a bit disembodied from specific places and subjects. So now let me explain what I mean for Wastocene with this expression. The Wastocene is not the age of waste as a thing, is not a fancy academic word to speak of the dirtiness of our cities. In my book, I define the Wastocene as the age of wasting relationships, producing wasted people and wasted ecosystems. It does not propose a universal we. Instead of indulging in a reification of the issue, waste in this case, it focuses on relationships, so not waste, but wasting relationships. And finally, it is indeed a global narrative, but with a very strong local taste. The Wastocene is something that one experiences in their life, bodies, community, etc. So in my volume, I propose commoning as the ultimate nemesis, the antidote for the wasting relationships. As wasting relationships reproduce profit through othering and extraction, commoning reproduces communities through caring and sharing. The basic assumption of the Wastocene discourse is that the body is part of the socio-ecological formations, and the body is in a dialectic relationships with the external ecologies. The body is and should be considered as part of any analysis of the socio-ecological relationships. I would like to mention here some pioneers in our field in environmental history who have looked at the body in environmental history. I am thinking here at Chris Sellers, Greg Mittman, Nancy Langston, and Linda Nash, among others. At least for me, the inspiration for this kind of approach is Karl Marx, when he wrote that, and I'm quoting from him, men, indeed Marx employed a sexist language. We would say today, humans. Humans live on nature means that nature is in their body, which we with which humans must remain in continuous interchange if they do not want to die, end quote from Marx. Those lines must be read together with his other well-known expression, and I am quoting again: labor is, first of all, a process between man and nature, a process by which man, through his own actions, mediates, regulates, and controls the metabolism between himself and nature, end quote. So the combination of nature and work is what we see as a body. The toxic body is neither just social or cultural, nor purely ecological. In the body, flows of materials and energy merge with genetic and social history. The external environment penetrates into the cells. The body is power inscribed into ecology. Epigenetics has actually demonstrated that the stratification of power relations and the memories of injustice stay within the body, telling their stories through the genetic narratives of each individual and across generation. So the Westocene is not easy to detect, to be seen. Sure, if we look around, we can see a lot of waste, but seeing the waste, does not make the wasting relationships any clearer. This is because wasting relationships produce two different kinds of toxicity. On one hand, the deepening of capitalist relations within the fabric of life, in the bodies and the environment, producing toxic ecologies at the service of private profits, what Benjury has called necrocapitalism, building upon Achille Mbembe idea of necropolitics. On the other hand, this is the second toxicity produced by the Westocene, the generation and maintenance of toxic narratives. That is, of narratives which silence injustice, impose official truth, and erase any possible alternative. This is why the Westocene stays invisible to us. But let's try to make it visible, and I will try to do so with a short example, with a brief example from Italy. Cemeteries can be powerful storytelling devices. Here in the slide, we are in Fortogna, in the northeast of Italy. On the top in the slide, you see the monumental cemetery reorganized in 2002 by the government for the 2,000 people killed in the 1963 Vajont Dam disaster. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but it's the largest dam disaster in Italy with 2,000 people killed. This memorial, the one that you can see on the top of the slide, this memorial replaced the former cemetery on the bottom, where each headstone was made following the desires of relatives and were decorated with pictures and memories. The headstone of the Paiola family, seven deaths, including 3 children, and you can see it in the slide, was perhaps the most emblematic of that place, and I am now translating from Italian. Brutally and cowardly murdered by inattention and human greed, still waiting in vain for justice for this infamous fault. Premeditated massacre, end quote. Indeed, the memory of the Vajont disaster is a controversial one, fueled by anger and mourning, while the new monumental cemetery aims to anesthetize it. Instead of headstones and text screaming pain and anger, we have now a tidy, organized memory, which evokes silent and peaceful mourning. The Vajont story is a handbook example of the Westocene. Wasting relationships producing wasted people and wasted places for the well-being of someone else, for the superior good of the nation. And I'm quoting here Arundhati Roy's book on the superior good of the nation. But this was not enough. the Wastocene needs also to impose a toxic narrative which invisibilizes the story. The Vajont was never part of the collective history of Italy, normalizes its violence, it is a natural event, and domesticated the memory, the anesthetic memorial I have described here, and then you can see in the slide. Of course, the Wastocene is both material and narrative. According to the independent website, thewordscounts.com, every second, 13 tons of hazardous waste are produced worldwide, almost 60 kilos for every human on the planet. The same website informs us that in 70 years, from the 1930s to the 2000s, the production of chemical substances has grown from 1 million to 400 million tons. Quoting an article published in The Lancet, an UN report stated that in 2015, about 9 million people died because of pollution, confirming toxic contamination as the, and I'm quoting from this UN report, as the single largest source of premature death in the world today, end quote. Numbers are powerful devices because they are impersonal and scientific. By definition, no matter how much actually they are biased. But moving myself within the field of environmental humanities and environmental history, I feel more comfortable with stories. With anthropologist Anna Tsing, let me say that we should consider storytelling as a scientific method to capture the intertwining of human and more than human lives. In my book, I include these 3 stories: Cancer Alley in Louisiana, Rio Doce in Brazil, and the electric dump site in Ghana of Agobloshi. So Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where the legacy of slavery and plantations merges with the present of petrochemical monoculture and its unequal impact on the Black community. Literally, the violence of capitalism embedded into the bodies of people, wasted communities, and wasted humans. The Rio Doce, instead, in Brazil, clearly shows the Wastocene logic, how the Wastocene logic unites humans and non-humans in its production of wasted lives and places. The collapse of the Fandau Dam in November 2015 released about 50 million cubic meters of mineral waste mixed with mud, killing the entire river, the entire Rio Doce. An entire ecosystem was subjugated to the mining industry under the usual extractivist regime, which produces the ultimate other, disposable places and people to be exploited up to their exhaustion. And finally, let's move to Ghana. More than 200,000 people, more than 200,000 tons of second-hand electronic goods arrived each year to Agobloshi, mostly from Western Europe. And between 5,000 to 10,000 people work in that dump. Those workers are exposed to several hazards coming from the general unhygienic conditions of the dump, the ways in which they disassemble the electronics, and the chemical properties of the materials. In other words, those workers, they are affected by the Wastocene logic, which disposes of both unwanted objects and unworthy people. And I want to see how I am with the time. So following this bird-eye view on the Wastocene, I focus in my book on a specific city, my home city, Naples in southern Italy. Naples has been almost an icon of what a wasted city might look like. We all remember the waste crisis, and I don't need to, and I do speak of the waste crisis in my book. But for today, I will focus on the epidemics and the city. I have argued that epidemics have worked as epiphanies of the Wastocene, meaning with this expression, epiphanies, the fact that those epidemics have functioned as manifestations of the wasting relationships that otherwise remain invisible to us. I have argued that those outbreaks have opened fractures in the wall of the Wastocene, the wall that separates those who are worthy from those who are considered disposable. So epidemics were always a clear break into the Wastocene. They shouted loud and clear that bodies, power, and waste were and are connected through socio-ecological relationships. So in 1884 and 1973, Naples was hit by two cholera epidemics that I argue did not only confirm the dirtiness of the city, but its deep otherness. And in the book, I give a sense of, the many, reports and, research done before the 1884 cholera epidemics, proving precisely this poverty of the city. So I will skip this part just for the sake of being on time. Writing during the 1884 cholera epidemics, the writer and journalist Matilde Serrao described what she called the bowels of Naples as a place soaked up in waste, where all the modern barriers separating humans and their daily spaces from the impurity were erased. Poverty, waste, and contamination were the pillars of this Napolitan political ecology of epidemics, indeed the historical materialization of the Wastocene. But what is really interesting here is also to look at what happened after the cholera epidemics, so the reclamation and sanitization of the city. As always with the Wastocene, placing the blame on the victims is a crucial dispositive for controlling the emergency while keeping intact the underlying norms. The Neapolitan poor were part of the contaminated ecologies producing the epidemic. So basically they were considered not the victims, but actually those to blame. So the problem was not to revert the wasting relationships, but to control them, to be sure that the ordering order they were supposed to impose would not explode and mix everything up. I argue that the sanitization policy following the 1884 cholera epidemics target mainly the subaltern people living in the most degraded areas of the city. Those people and their dilapidated houses had to leave to make room for modern boulevard buildings for the middle class. With more than 35,000 destitute inhabitants expelled from the sanitized districts, the sanitization policy following the 1884 cholera epidemic meant deportation on a massive scale. While the cholera epidemic risked blowing up the ordering infrastructures, securing the immunization of the rich and the disposability of the poor, the consequent measures were meant to restructure the wasting relationship while hiding their crude consequences. This is a little bit what is also happening today when with the COVID pandemic, many people are talking about going back to normal. Don't take me wrong. I do want to travel and actually come and visit you. I want to go back to normal, but I want also to say that maybe the normal was the problem for many people. Maybe we need also to take the opportunity of the pandemic, as Arundhati Roy has written, as a portal towards another world, because otherwise going back to what it was might not be so useful for many of us. And I had here something about the cholera epidemic in the 1970s, but maybe we can skip this for the sake of time. And go to the final and the conclusion of my talk. The epiphanies of the Wastocene are crucial because they make the wasting relationships visible. Because an important corollary of the wasting relationships is the production of toxic narratives, as I said before. that is of narratives that invisibilize and normalize injustice. If there is a cholera outbreak, it is because the poor are not attentive to hygiene. If people are getting sick in a poor community, it is because they do not have the right lifestyles. In my short book, I go deeper into this concept of toxic narratives. As I said a few times during my presentation, the Wastocene is not about waste, but about the wasting relationships producing wasted human and more than human communities. However, wasting does not occur without resistance. An important ingredient of this toxic narrative is the discourse that in the Wastocene, in the midst of these wasting relationships, everyone is alone. Even more than alone, everyone is fighting against the others to save herself, their family, etc. As Margaret Thatcher used to say, I am quoting here, there is no such a thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families, end quote. But actually, the UK Prime Minister was wrong. Community exists, and in the most difficult moments, they mobilize. As wasting relationships, the engine of the Wastocene, are based on consuming and ordering, commoning practices aim to reproduce resources and communities. I argue that the contrary of wasting is commoning rather than recycling, because commoning dismantles the ordering project, creates communities, and has the potential to undermine the Wastocene regime. In this final part of my talk, I am going to offer a few and very sketchy examples of commoning experiences, which I interpret as counter-hegemonic storytelling. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many have been the evidence that Thatcher was wrong, and commoning occurs, producing unexpected communities reacting to the terrible wasting of lives and livelihood. In several countries, people have started to self-organize, building an infrastructure of solidarity and support, especially targeting the most vulnerable in the community. In several countries, people's solidarity brigades have been created with the aim to offer concrete help to those who were struggling most in the pandemic. Sometimes in the bags packed with pasta and canned tomatoes, people have found books, a flyer on the Care Income campaign, or a questionnaire on their needs. One of the pillars of the Wastocene regime is that each individual is responsible for herself, a message which becomes even louder in times of crisis. Toxic narratives blame the individual for being poor, sick, subaltern, and so on. And my time is over. Common in practice sabotage the wasting logic because they reproduce social values through inclusion and community building, while the latter, wasting relationship, reproduce inequalities through ordering and wasting. Maybe I can skip this other example, which was an example from Bosnia-Herzegovina, and a struggle happening there around the toxic legacy of a chemical factory in Tuzla. And I can go directly to the conclusion since my time is over. So as the Wastocene manifests itself through the imposition of toxic narratives and the erasure of the stories of resistance, so the struggle against it, against the Wastocene, passes also through the construction of alternative archives, as those created by the Workers' University in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the one that I couldn't tell you about. Those stories tell loud and clear that to dismantle the Wastocene, it is not enough to clean up a toxic area. To fight back against the Wastocene logic, the activists, the communities have to recover the stories of the workers intoxicated by the capitalistic organization of labor and the struggle occurring within and outside the factory in the community. They need to build new relationships among them and with the environment, as it occurred in the city with the Solidarity Brigades, and in Tuzla, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, with the plenums and the Workers' University. Sometimes, indeed, people can dance around a toxic fire, in the sense that they might find the reasons and strengths to imagine and practice new communities, building upon their experience of being wasted, placed on the other side of the Westocene divide. Damir Arsenievich writes that one of the participants in the struggles in Bosnia-Herzegovina said that for him, that experience was like being on vacation, meaning with it the happiness and the breaking of the normal he felt through that experience. In many places around the world, among the ruins of thousands of apocalypses, subaltern people have been living in for ages. Well, people are telling another story, one of solidarity, commoning, and resistance. The Westocene aims to waste those stories, erase them, domesticated their memories. A revolutionary project needs to take control of the means of production of narratives too. And I stop here. Sorry for being a little bit longer than I thought.
No. Well, thank you so much. You can hurt all people, but
Thank you. Thank you.
of course, I believe that it was an excellent
Thank you.
reflection, and special is a challenge. And I have already one question from one of the members of the from Cristina Brito. Cristina Brito is a member of our reporter, of course, and from the University of Lisbon, New Universidade Nova de Lisboa, and she has a question. Could the concept of Westocene be considered in other larger chronologies and not just the 20th century and current days? Where in time could we place the onset of the Westocene? Thanks a lot for a great keynote. Muito obrigada, says Cristina. Thank you, Cristina.
Inês, do you want me to answer?
Yes, because okay, for the moment is the only one. So if you have...
So Cristina, first of all, obrigado eu. It's a very good question. Maybe one thing I want to say is that, well, I don't know to say this is in a good way, but basically I do not think that I have actually, I don't think I have found a new geological epoch in a sense. I don't have the expertise. Maybe I don't even have the ambition. I truly believe that the Anthropocene is a useful conceptual tool that we can use. I think that it's important for us, especially people, scholars in the humanities and social sciences, to be critical, to find also, the limitation of the Anthropocene. Maybe the 3 limits that I try to talk about today, or maybe others, I don't know. So, but on the other hand, I do not believe that, changing a label will change reality. I always make an example about this in a book that I have co-edited with Greg Mittman and Rob Emmett, Future Remains. There is a fantastic chapter written by Laura Pulido with the title Race in the Anthropocene. So what I mean is Laura Pulido didn't come up with another name. No, she could have said, I don't know, race in the white Ocene, the age of white people, right? But instead, she's actually using the Anthropocene. So what I am trying to say here is that we can, how can I say, push a little bit back against the limitations, or at least what I believe are the limitations on the Westocene, and still using the word, the label, as Laura Pulido did in this fantastic chapter. So in this sense, I am not looking for the golden spike, as you know very well, right, in the Anthropocene discourse. I am not looking for the golden spike where the Westocene started, because I do believe that Westocene is more a provocation, is a conceptual tool that we can use not so much in terms of finding a golden spike, the point in which the Westocene started, but rather trying to interpret the histories we are working on in terms of wasting relationships. So in this sense, I completely agree with you, and I do believe that the Westocene can be, I would love to see the Westocene, concept readapted also in different, chronological scale. For instance, early modern time, medieval time, and so on and so forth. Because I think, but I don't think that the issue is so much to look when waste become very big, very strong, because then we can say that is probably with the great acceleration, right, with the Anthropocene. But maybe if we look not at waste as a thing, but a wasting relationship as a process, well, we can think about many processes in terms of the making of wasted people and wasted communities, human and more than human communities. So, well, this is my answer. It's not precisely an answer. It's more like, the pleasure to reflect with you, Christina, about this important issue.
Okay, thank you so much. I have here another. It's not just a question, but maybe a definition.
Yeah.
And it's from Denise. Denise, I believe this Denise from the University of Coimbra. She has a presentation, so the role of social memory in the fight against taboos and stigmatization, just in the next, after the break, and she put here, and I believe, if you agree with this, it looks, Denise says, it looks like the concept of waste is in itself a modern concept, in a way where we started producing in quantities that we don't exactly need.
Yeah, yes.
Do you agree with this definition?
Denise, thank you very much for your comment. Well, absolutely. We are in a, especially maybe since, as I said, maybe the 60s, or maybe a little bit earlier, we have entered in a consumerist phase, no? And of course we need to be careful here about the we, because otherwise we are repeating, the mistake that we think, at least I think, the Anthropocene narrative is proposing. I mean, when we say we, probably we are thinking about, global north, the west, mostly white, middle class, upper class people. And I agree with you. However, let's try to go, how can I say, to talk among us about this. So I agree with you, but on the other hand, I would like to, I don't know how to say this, to provoke you, maybe thinking that maybe if we don't think about waste as a thing, but we think about waste as wasting relationships. So I mean, the main issue with the wasting relationships is a little bit the idea that, affluent societies, they deeply need a dump somewhere inside or outside, which is actually securing their wealth, their progress, their development, and so on and so forth. This is inside, rich societies, and outside rich societies. So you have, poor people, subaltern people living in, how can I say, in the US, and you have the global South. In this sense, maybe I think that what is interesting for me in this notion of wasting is to put the body in place, because we need to be careful that waste, and as wasting relationships, is not just outside. It's not something that is, how can I say, growing up somewhere in a dump, but it's also something that is growing up in our body. And I would say in the stories we tell about ourselves, those toxic narratives that I try to, how can I say, to discuss a little bit today. But I mean, Denise, I agree with you. I think it's a very good point that waste is basically the production of wealthy and, consumerist societies. I am just wondering if we can also think of waste as a process, and what does it imply for the body. So we are actually not thinking of waste only as something outside. This is, I mean, for me, what has been very helpful has been the idea of transcorporeality. This concept has been elaborated especially in the eco-critical, how can I say, eco-critical field. And I am thinking here about Stacia Limo's book, Bodily Nature, which I think can be very useful to consider when we think about wasting relationship. Where is the place of toxicity in relationship to our bodies, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much anyway. Great comment.
I have another one from Cristina Joanás de Melo. No, she repeats the same one. And the question is Cristina Joanás de Melo from the University of Lisbon and the Center of Contemporary History. What about, I'm quoting, what about thinking about the good Anthropocene? This is a challenge and provocation.
Man.
Man did not plan to destroy nature for the fun of creating conditions for a collective ecological vital annihilation. So what about thinking in history of actions of ecological recovery performed by the, would this be a line for reflection, the positive Anthropocene? She's working in the forest recovery, so maybe it's a good case.
First of all, I want to say hello to Christina, a very old friend of mine. Very, very grateful that you are here with us today, Christina, and thank you for listening to me. I mean, the good Anthropocene is a concept, actually, as you might know, has been developed mostly. Thank you. It was developed mostly by a think tank based in the US, which is the Breakthrough Institute. I think they have actually I don't know, a pamphlet or maybe an essay with the title The Good Anthropocene. If I am not mistaken, the expression, the line, I am more or less quoting, you know, word by word, but forgive me if it's not precisely like so. They say humans have become like gods, so it's better if we start acting like gods and embrace this. Bruno Latour has contributed to that kind of thinking with the kind of famous essay with the title Love Your Monsters, if I'm not mistaken, Love Your Monsters. No, the idea that the problem with Frankenstein was that the creator of Frankenstein abandoned Frankenstein. The problem was not the monster per se, but the fact that the creator, stopped loving him. Okay, this is Christina, if I can be a little bit open, as sometimes I am, and I know that I shouldn't, because we, you know, as academic, we should be maybe a little bit more prudent and, you know, careful with words. But to tell you the truth, you know, we are among friends, even if it's a conference, right? I am a little bit skeptical about the idea of the good Anthropocene. I do believe in the good commoning. I do believe in the possibility, absolutely, about, you know, restoring, recreating, rethinking our relationships beyond wasting relationships. But in a sense, I think that there is something that must be said, which is that some relationships were made not to destroy the environment, I agree with you, but at least they didn't care about the environment and people. I mean, we have a lot of examples in this. No, the capitalistic organization of labor, when we think about mining, you know, when it was very clear that silicosis was affecting the bodies of miners, somebody was hiding this because they were making profits out of this. The Vaillant Dam disaster, well, of course, the idea was not to create a disaster. I agree with you, absolutely. The idea was to create profits. But the point was that how can I say, the aim to create profit was so big, so strong, that in the end, it was not so relevant to listen to the people, you know, alerting, because it was very clear that a disaster would arrive. So it was not, you know, a natural, you know, weird disaster, but was something that many people were talking about at least 5-10 years before it actually happened. So what I'm trying to say here is that I do agree with you about the possibility, as I said, I do agree with you about the possibility to subvert, to sabotage the Wastocene logic. And in this sense, I think that Wastocene is helpful. And actually, this is what I wrote in the book, because it's so difficult to speak of the good Wastocene. So there is no way that somebody can say, well, let's do the good Wastocene. And I I think that we could do the good commoning or common scene. The idea of, you know, caring. No, if wasting relationships are reproducing profits through ordering and consuming, well, commoning is reproducing communities through caring and sharing. So I agree with you. There is a possibility of something good, but maybe we need a little bit to change the aim. If the aim is just, you know, profit making, what we will get is that we will have the privatization of profits and the socialization of costs. So somebody's making money out of oil extraction, but then all of us will need to pay for climate change or for, you know, the destruction of the Niger Delta or the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. But I mean, I hope that I hope that it's clear that I am not absolutely at all critical of what you said, Christina. I completely, how can I say, relate with the ambition to have hopes and to think that something can change. You remember, maybe you were there, the last ESCH event we had in July, I deeply and strongly wanted our roundtable with the title, "The Times We Changed the World," with the idea that, you know, there has been times in which we were able to make huge changes, and we had 5 fantastic stories about this. So I agree with you, but maybe I think they were actually sabotaging the logic beyond the Westocene rather than just saving it.
Well, we have a last question, but I believe that we are just a very short answer. It's from Sinara Sandri. It's from the Center for Social Science of Coimbra. She asked, do you think it would be possible to use the concept of waste to think about consumption of spaces in cities? Thanks. So a brief answer, please.
Yeah, yes. I could be very brief and say yes. If I should elaborate for maybe 1 minute, I completely agree. It's precisely what I also try to explain in the book. As I said, wasting relationships are producing wasted people and wasted places. And I believe that this is also the issue. And you know, what is interesting about the wasting of places is that of course, we are thinking about a dump, right? I think we are thinking about maybe a polluting factory, and I agree, of course. But what if we think about, for instance, gentrification or touristification? I believe that this is also a wasting of spaces, because it means to precisely expel people living there and transform a commons in something somehow privatized, gentrified, or just made for tourists. So maybe we can even be, how can I say, creative and thinking about the consumption of spaces, sure, in terms of, you know, wasting of pollution, but also in terms of gentrification or touristification, because it's a subtraction of commons. So wasting as ordering and extraction, commoning as sharing and it's sharing and caring. And I stop here. Hopefully I was a little bit quicker this time.
No, Marco, it's a pleasure to hear you. And thanks for you and for all participations. I have a brief announce. You must leave this Zoom session and go to the next one after the break and click in the link and join. Click in the bottom, join. It is, of course, this is small, but the most important was always receive you, Marco, in Coimbra, in this virtual space, because we are in all parts, and this is the good thing of technology. So thank you so much again, and for your support to Reporter. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. I'm very grateful for this opportunity.